My name's Mark, as you hopefully know by now, and I'm joined by Brent. And today, hi Brent.
Morning.
Yes.
Hi.
Brent, did you have your coffee yet?
I took a few sips. Yeah.
Okay, have a little sugar, man.
I'm just involved in this book here.
Okay, he's reading. Okay, you read, we'll talk. So exciting
right.
for us and probably for our listeners, because they won't have to listen to mostly me blab on and on. We have a special guest, and the guest is Jimmy Song. So Jimmy, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. And looking forward to talking about a lot of the stuff that, I've been talking about, but specifically Bitcoin and Christianity. I'm all about those two things. I'm really kind of a two-trick pony. So, these are my two tricks.
Well,
let's go.
It's one more trick than most ponies, right? So that's good.
Maybe.
So, Jimmy, you've been in the Bitcoin space for quite a while. Brent has a pile of your books over there at our studio. I'm not at the studio.
There you go. Yeah.
Hey, Jimmy, I gotta say, this book I picked up a couple weeks ago, but it was hard to pick up because it was sitting on the counter. Fiat ruins everything. So for people who can't see, you walk by that book and you kind of want to just leave it on the table. I don't want to ruin my day by reading this, but I'm halfway through. So it was just a depressing book to pick up.
Oh, sorry about that. I really should. I do put some hope at the end of each chapter. I gotta get to maybe, the end. Lots of dad jokes in that one. The top 10 lists and so on. Yeah.
That's perfect. So, Alan, why don't you tell our listeners just a little bit about you? I don't know, the 5-minute story of how you went from where you were to where you are now.
Yeah, so I'm a coder by trade. I've been programming since I was 9 years old. That's the first thing I did right out of college, and I've been a programmer, ever since then. And it was in 2011 when I found out about Bitcoin. So it's been 13 years now, which is kind of crazy. And that was a story on Slashdot. I saw it and didn't know anything about it and fell down the rabbit hole, and I've been down that rabbit hole ever since. So I'm still there, still learning. I've written 5 books. The first one was Programming Bitcoin with O'Reilly. So like I said, I'm a coder. I wanted to teach the protocol, and that's what that book is about. Written 4 other books, which are a little, softer, aimed at different audiences. The Little Bitcoin book, Thank God for Bitcoin, Bitcoin and the American Dream, Fiat Ruins Everything. Those are all the books that I've written. I've done a lot of stuff. I've contributed to Bitcoin Core as a developer. I've contributed to other open source Bitcoin projects. I've got my own Bitcoin library that's open source that I can, try to contribute to every once in a while and so on. But yeah, I'm also a Christian. I'm a husband, a father. I have children, and we do lots of stuff, besides Bitcoin. So yeah, that's who I am, I guess.
Okay, excellent. Is that why you got the green screen, so we don't see the toys scattered everywhere?
Yeah, I want to know where the cowboy hat came in on that journey. You came across Bitcoin in 2011? That's early on too. So.
Yeah, so I moved to Texas in 2012, so about a year after I found out about Bitcoin. And I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, which is actually probably more liberal than Canada, which is kind of saying something. But yeah, we moved to Texas, and this was. At first I did the boots and then I added the belt, found out cowboy boots are extremely comfortable. And for a while there, as I was kind of getting more invited to conferences and stuff, people would look at my shoes and say, oh, okay, you're from Texas or whatever. Other people wouldn't get it, and they'd be asking, hey, so where are you coming in from? And, the thing about Texans, if you know anything about Texans, is that, they want to let you know, they want to make sure that you know that they're from Texas, right? And I'm the same way. I want people to know that I'm from Texas. So it's a little offensive to me that people couldn't pick it up just with the boots and belt. So I got a hat in 2017. It's been a great branding decision because not many Asian cowboys out there. So, I get to be sort of that unique Asian cowboy Bitcoin guy. And I've been doing it ever since. But yeah, I mean, more seriously, like I wear it because I'm from Texas. I wear it also because, the industry that we work in has a lot of dangers, but also a lot of opportunity. And mostly because I love that 1800s era, right? I think that's the last time that we really had true frontier pushing. We haven't really had that ever since. And I love the phrase, "Go West, young man," right? And this was told to everybody on the East Coast during 19th century America. And the reason was because whatever occupation you had, it could be like a cobbler or a baker or a candlestick maker or whatever you did, there was always a lot of competition on the East Coast because that's where all the people were. And if you're like a 22-year-old or something like that, they would just tell you, "Go West, young man. You can, there's a lot of opportunity out there," because all the frontier towns didn't have any of those things. So you always had opportunity out on the frontier. So the hat for me represents that frontier, and Bitcoin is that frontier. There's a lot of opportunity for people that understand Bitcoin. You don't have to compete, with the accountant that's been doing it for 40 years. You can instead serve the Bitcoiners that want to know all the tax laws and make sure you get things right on that front. You don't have to be the compete against all the other real estate developers that are, in the fiat world that have been doing it for many years. You go and serve the Bitcoiners. I will bet you anything that they want different kinds of houses, right? Like maybe built a little more permanently and more long lasting and so on. So that's what the hat is for. And that's, I started wearing it in 2017. It's been a brand thing ever since. And I can't really ever, get rid of it because then people wouldn't know who I was. So yeah.
You're stuck with it now. I bet you didn't expect all that.
It's permanent. I can't go anywhere without it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That frontier attitude. I haven't really thought of that before, but yeah, like the governments are pushing the frontiers of fiat all the time, right? But this is a sort of a different frontier. Well, it's just that promise of freedom, that sort of individual rights, but also responsibilities, right? You go out there, you can make something of yourself.
We lost Mark. Maybe.
Well, at least we're still recording. Yeah. And I'm sure he'll be back. But that frontier is something that I think you need to be pushing. And once you get way too internal, right, like inward focusing, it's kind of like you kind of die a little bit, right? Like every time you're not really pushing the frontier, you always have to be doing something to sort of challenge yourself as a civilization. Otherwise, you kind of die off. And that's kind of been a significant part of the problem in the 20th and 21st centuries, is that way too many people are just sort of navel gazing. And look at the technological advance since like 1971, pretty much.
It's just plateaued.
Everything is inward focusing, right? Like everything is, like tell me more about me, all about Facebook and, like connections and how I'm perceived by other people, instead of like, nuclear jet engines or something, right? Like going out past where we've ever gone before, conquering land that we've never been before. That's a true spirit of expansion and frontier and conquering and doing things. And if you think about the United States in the 19th century, it went from pretty much like a former backwater British colony to world superpower, 100 years. And it was because of all the people that were pushing the frontier, essentially. So I believe Bitcoin to be sort of that frontier pushing. I don't see Fiat doing any of that. It's all inward focus. It's all navel gazing. It's all trying to distract you and control you and do things that make you a good slave to the state instead of, pushing the frontier and, conquering, right? And
Yeah.
doing
Well, so you
things.
said you got into Bitcoin in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
You say it's like a new frontier still, but I guess in 2011 it probably would have been very much the Wild West. Like you got your hat on. We're talking about the frontier. You're in coding, right? So when
Uh-huh.
you started 2011, like what were things like in the Bitcoin space that got you into it? Like how did you realize it was a new frontier when you got into it? Or are you just
Well,
starting to
I
see
was
that more
very
and more?
curious, right?
Okay.
Like, and I think I had the right background to really appreciate it because not only was I a coder, I mean, and there's like many varieties of coder, right? Like you got the DB admin to like, web front end JavaScript, developer and, everything in between. And the particular area that I kind of knew a little bit more about was cryptography because I was a math major in college. But that's one aspect of it, and the other aspect was the economic stuff, and I learned a lot of that after 2008. So I think I was pretty primed to understand what it was when I encountered it. If you're missing one piece or the other, there's a tendency to dismiss it. If you just come from the economic aspect, then it's like, well, I don't know how this thing works. So, there's no way it has the properties that it claims. Or if you come from the technological side, then the tendency is to think, oh, well, somebody will build an even better mousetrap and, I can afford to wait or whatever. These are two separate areas that you need to understand to really get Bitcoin. So,
And
I wouldn't
you
say
had
that
both? Like you had
yeah,
both
I mean,
pieces, right?
I had inklings of both. I had
Okay.
enough of both to recognize that this was something interesting. Um, and I didn't really even get into the coding aspect until 2013 when I like peaked under and started getting paid for it and so on. But yeah, like back then it was just like when I got in there were no altcoins, right? It was nobody had made any of those yet. The only exchange that you could really access was Mt. Gox in Japan. The And you had to use like a money transmitter to get stuff there. There were no books, no articles. People were just sort of playing with it. The only place that had any content at all was Bitcoin talk forums. And, I mean, people like were saying like kind of crazy stuff. I mean, I guess you could later on that year, you can buy some stuff off of Silk Road or something like that. I wasn't interested, so that wasn't anything I did. Also later that year, we had the first altcoins. That came along. Most of these like people don't know anything about, like IX Coin or Geistgeld or Tenebrix or any, like they're all like long dead. But yeah, I mean that's what happened back then. There were all these like people asking for Bitcoin loans and so on the Bitcoin talk forums. It really was kind of like the Wild West. Nobody knew anything, and nobody had any idea what it was, where this would go. I still remember that like. Bitcoin talk thread about like the 10,000 Bitcoin for two pizzas thing. And
Yeah.
people would keep adding to it as Bitcoin price went up. They were like, that's like a lot of money. It's Bitcoin's at like $20. That's $20,000, or I mean, $200,000. That's like that's like real money or whatever. But that's the way things were back then. And of course, like Mt. Gox, was insolvent. We just didn't know until late 2013. There were all these other exchanges that were sort of like fly by night, and they would take your money and run away. There were all these web wallets that you would deposit money to, and they would just go away and take your money. It was just kind of a crazy time, and obviously we have a lot more resources now, but I still consider it the frontier because people are still building stuff and they're still pushing into more use cases and so on.
Yeah, so you got
Hey,
me.
welcome back, Mark.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, internet dropped me there. It's the Wild West over here for internet, apparently. The so you, talking
man.
about the frontier kind of made me think, like, and you talked about the growth of the United States, and would you agree? It just kind of occurred to me, but the U.S. was kind of founded. You go back to the Constitution. I'm Canadian, so I don't know everything about the U.S., but on the idea of natural rights, right? The natural rights of man. We can go back to the Reformation with Martin Luther, where it's like, I was talking about sort of those individual rights and responsibilities for being on the frontier. And that's kind of the idea of the states, right? And I think that is what really helped to propel the United States to become a superpower. And then, you've seen, you've seen sort of the slow, you talk about navel gazing, that slow inward spiral leading to more and more decadence and just decay in the system in general. And Bitcoin, I think why so many people are so hopeful about it is that it represents, it's not a savior, but it represents a divergence from that system back to maybe sort of the roots of the states, right? I don't know. You think I'm taking that too far? Or?
Yeah. The way I would frame it is, the United States was founded on natural law principles, and if you don't know the concept of natural law, it's the idea that we are endowed by our Creator with certain rights, and this is in the Declaration of Independence, right to liberty. And pursuit of happiness and property and all this other stuff. But the idea is that they already belong to us. The natural rights are already there. It's not any like they're granted by God and not by the state. And for the state to take away natural rights is wrong. That is the idea behind natural rights and natural law. But the alternate model is sort of like a positivist law. And, I wrote an article a while back about exactly this. It's the idea that only the state has the right to give, has the authority to give you rights. So if we say, want the freedom to assemble, right, in whatever groups we want, no, it's the state that gives you that right. And this became way more popular, I think, post Karl Marx and the popularity of socialism and so on. This idea that the state grants you those rights, and it's been a struggle, largely because the natural rights, natural law philosophy has more or less degraded over the last 100 years, and I firmly point the blame at fiat money. This was one of the ways in which natural law was subverted, because you don't have the right to property necessarily, because the Federal Reserve can expand the money supply at any time. So the value that you've stored in fiat currency gets debased away from you. But not just that. It goes all over the place. I think we saw during COVID, your freedom of assembly, right, your right to associate with whoever you want, was completely threatened. And in Canada, it was, you don't even have a right to protest, right? You don't have a right to, possession of your own stuff, really, because they can take it away at any point. And this is sort of like the big divide right now. It's not necessarily left and right. It's sort of the authoritarians versus people that want freedom. And, it's the people that believe in positivist law, that the state can do whatever they want with their citizens. And it's almost like we're their slaves. Or we have natural rights and we have natural law, and the state is there to protect our natural rights and make sure that those are not violated by not just other people, but also the state itself. And that's a very different philosophy, and it depends really on the metaphysic, the philosophical grounding that you have. And for me as a Christian, I believe in natural law. I believe that God has endowed us with certain rights, and for anyone to violate them, especially government, is wrong, and that's something that we need to assert. A lot of Christians, I feel like, are too nice, and that niceness is completely used against them. They why aren't you Ned Flanders? Why aren't you doing everything like the caricature of Christianity that I have of you? Instead, like when we should be asserting our natural rights, and we should be asserting those, and like complaining or even rebelling if those are violated, because that's part of what we were given by God, and if someone's taking it away, it's our property. We should fight back, essentially.
Wow. So we're Canadian.
One
Jimmy.
sentence you mentioned.
We're very polite. Oh. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're too nice.
Hey, I just listened to a fascinating podcast. I think it's Geopolitics and Empire. Jeffrey E. Paul, who I'd never heard of before, but he's got a book out. And anyways, his assertion is that kind of a lot of this, you talk about positivism. He kind of traces it back to National Socialism. When universities first, started doctoral programs in the States, they needed training, they needed experts. And where did they get those experts? And this is in the 1800s. They went to Germany, where the seeds of National Socialism were already firmly planted. So you had all these academics that were trained there, came back here. You had professors from those faculties come here, and right from the get-go, academia was kind of infected with this idea that, they're very much against natural law, but more, the state is an organism. We're all part of it. We're here to serve the state, so therefore the state determines what we have. So it was just fascinating for me, because I always kind of go back to Marxism, and then cultural Marxism, and even infiltration, into our universities, U.S. universities in the 40s and 50s. But, he goes back right to the 1800s. And I just thought that was pretty fascinating anyways. And I kind of nerd out on stuff like that. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's very relevant, because the roots of a lot of this stuff is really like a lot of it goes back to Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and I guess to some degree maybe Darwin and even Freud. But there's a chapter in the book "Fiat Ruins Everything" where I talk about a lot of that stuff, the Frankfurt School and where it came from, and the legacy that it's left. Essentially, like, all of the different critical theories come straight from the Frankfurt School. And the Frankfurt School is a combination of Marxism and Freudian psychology. And both have been completely debunked and completely shown to be ineffective and so on. But that's the basis from which you get critical race theory and queer theory and intersectionality and, all the oppression around race and colonialism and all of that stuff comes essentially from the Frankfurt School and its intellectual ancestors. So for me, looking at all of that, it's really sort of like this lack of God that leads to it. Because if you look at the people that I talked about, Marx and Nietzsche and Freud and Darwin, this was the commonality that they had, was, they removed God from the equation. And once you remove God from the equation, where is your anchor for any kind of morals? And there is none. And this is what, ironically, Nietzsche talked about. You realize what's going to happen when you untether from the sun. You have no anchor of anything. And the way government has gone is essentially this, de-anchoring from, moral values that are given by God to values that we're going to make up because it's convenient for us for our purposes. And those purposes are inevitably staying in power and keeping the power and growing that power.
How do you link that to fiat money? Because your book is about fiat. And from my understanding, true fiat money came about in 1971, they take they unhook the gold standard, and now money exists because the government said so. So does that just exacerbate all of this, or is that kind of, the reason why we went down this road to begin with? Or is it like, sin exists, it's in our hearts, we're tendency to, to pursue a world without God. And, the fact that we can print money to oblivion makes it a lot easier for us to pursue that and continue this false sense of reality.
Yeah. So Karl Marx in his Communist Manifesto, the fifth plank is, state control of money, essentially, and of all banking and stuff like that. It's essentially saying, we need fiat money for the communists as part of the Communist Manifesto. And the reason he said that was because he really believed that you needed the state to control everything. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to control the money. And really, if you think about it, the most fungible and easily liquid asset that you have in any society is your money, right? Like if you don't have like whatever you have, you might have things that are worth a lot of money, like real estate or whatever. But it's not very liquid, right? Like the average time to close on a house is like 45 days or something. It takes a long time to get rid of it, and it's not very quick. Money is extremely liquid, and that if you control that, you can essentially take property away from people, and that is a significant part of natural rights is your right to property. And if you can undermine the right to property, then you can essentially enact positivist law. And communists were pretty much the worst at this. You can see what they did with the Soviet Union, the USSR, and how they essentially didn't exactly eliminate money. The only society that's managed to do that was Cambodia, and Pol Pot killed on a per capita basis more people than anybody else in the 20th century. Like nobody can
and a lot of people were killed in the 20th century. So.
but I mean, he like the closest they came to really enacting true communism was Cambodia, and he ended up killing way more people on a per capita basis than anywhere else. So that is a significant part of what it means to have property, money, and that once that's debased, then you can enact a lot of other things. And this has been the pattern of government, is that once you control the money, now you can control everything else through that money. If you look at any legislation where they want to prevent some people from doing something that they perceive to be bad, almost always there's some provision about using the financial system to sort of deputize them to actually catch the criminals. So AML KYC laws are essentially that. It's deputizing banks because everyone has to touch money, right? At some point, right? Mm-hmm. And this is one of the reasons why they're trying to eliminate cash, is so that everyone has to come through this funnel, and you can use this choke point to catch whoever is sort of like dissenting against whatever the government wants. So it ends up being a significant tool of control, and you can sort of steal from everybody else without them really realizing it. You have this plausible deniability around inflation, right? Like you have weird rhetoric that for some reason works for a large number of people, right? It's not us printing trillions of dollars. It's the greedy grocery stores and gas stations and corporations that are doing it, or there are supply chain problems, or this is transitory, or whatever. There's always something that you can blame, and I mean, Safety has this thread going about the ridiculous things that inflation is blamed on, including like Beyonce's music, and, like just random stuff, right? Like just It's anything but the actual reason, and this is the game that politicians get to play, and why it's so attractive to them, because they can, if it's an explicit tax, if you have a tax on your energy consumption, for example, like some BTU tax or something like that, people are going to get mad at you, right? Like you're the one taking the money away, and it's very explicit, very easy. But you use inflation. It's like, well, it's actually these people's fault and these other people's fault and these other people's fault, and you have that plausible deniability, and you can blame it on anybody but yourself, and you can keep doing it while blaming other people. It's this like nefarious tool in the hands of central government that lets them essentially carry out a positivist law program, where they can say, okay, well, we're going to give you these rights, and we're going to make you dependent on us, and you have to do essentially what we say. And, this is the thing about free, right? I talked a while back with the highest ranking North Korean defector ever. And this is Tae Young-ho. He was like a deputy ambassador to England, I believe, or to the UK. He was also an ambassador at one point to Sweden and so on. So he was within like the North Korean power structure or whatever. And I had like a 3-hour conversation with him a while back, and he was telling me, well, okay, here is how Kim Il-sung, the first sort of like dear leader, right, of North Korea, here's how he consolidated power. He gave away stuff for free. He said, all right, healthcare, you're getting it for free. A house, you're getting it for free. A job, we will make sure you have a job. Food, we're going to make sure you have food. We're going to give everything away for free. And this made him super popular, right? It's like, oh, we're getting all of this or whatever. But then scarcity hits, right? You start running out of everyone else's or of other people's money because you're just consuming and not really producing. And he pointed out, okay, well, so what happens? Well, at some point, they run out of medicine and you go to the doctor. Well, sorry, we don't have any medicine for you. What are you going to do? Well, you can't really complain. It was free in the first place. But more like sinister than that is this idea that, well, did you do all the things that we told you to do, right? Did you go to your struggle session, right? Did you support the party? And do you have you done all of this stuff? Compliance becomes the payment.
Yeah.
When you're getting something for free, compliance becomes the payment. And I bring this up because this is how all of these systems work, is that you might get quote unquote free healthcare in Canada, right? How many times have I been told as an American, oh, Canada has free healthcare or whatever. But that healthcare comes with strings attached. You have to comply with the government. When they tell you that you have to get the vaccine, or when they tell you that you have to stay indoors, or when they tell you that you have to do this, and this, if you don't comply, guess what? They're going to take those things away. And this is the sort of like Faustian bargain that you end up making with this free stuff, is that you are not paying for it. Therefore, you are paying with your compliance. And it's sort of like a debt that you can never pay off, because it's perpetual. You can never comply enough where they'll leave you alone. It's just continual. It's actually compounding on itself, where they'll keep asking more and more of you. Whereas like a market transaction where you're paying, it's way better. And this is the thing that I learned from Tae Young-ho, is that, a market transaction is a beautiful thing because both people have an obligation to each other, instead of this sort of perpetual enslavement / debt that you've incurred as a result of getting something for quote unquote free. It's all about compliance. And like that hit me like a ton of bricks, because I was like, okay, what am I getting for free right now? Well, I'm getting Gmail for free. I'm getting Twitter for free. I'm getting this stuff for free. And guess what? They expect your compliance, right? You can't say certain things on those platforms, or you might get canceled. And you can't, like, there's no real recourse because you got it for free in the first place. What are you complaining about? So this idea of positivist law becomes just way more potent, because they can steal from everybody else to provide you things for free to get your compliance, so they have more power.
and then blame it on blame the effects of that, the inflation on Beyonce or whoever else. I say we blame it on Mark.
I'll
Mark,
take it.
What are you doing wrong?
Beard inflation. Like, how do you get that across to people, Jimmy? Because, like, yeah, I fully agree. But, you know, you're at I don't know. I don't go to any cocktail parties, but, you know, whatever, family gathering or church gathering or something. And, you know, how do you get that into like 1 minute without going back to like, well, you know, you got Rousseau versus Locke, and, you know, like, they don't care. And
the Enlightenment denied God, and therefore,
like the only reason I think,
I get
the only reason I think most people, so in Canada, we're seeing a bit of a sea change in sentiment, right? Everybody is 100% sick of our government, but not because of any of the stuff that you just said, not because they realize their natural rights are being eroded, or like, there are people who get that, but for most people, it's just about their pocketbook, right? The system isn't working anymore. Free healthcare. Yeah. Awesome. Great. Well, like, we pay taxes for it, so it's not free, but that's our bargain. We have higher taxes. We get healthcare. Fine. But our healthcare sucks. And we, you know, if you want good healthcare, it's true. You end up paying separately for it anyways. Like, maybe I'll drive down to Buffalo and, go to a clinic there for healthcare because I can get it immediately and I don't have to wait 6 months. System. So in effect, we have a 2-tier system anyways, but that's what people are upset about, is their pocketbooks. It's inflation, rent, groceries, all that stuff. Like, I don't know. Do you have a way to get that across in 1 minute? Because I haven't figured that out yet.
And go.
I wish I could. I mean, but I think just exploring inflation and what it is.
You wrote like 4 books on this, so good luck fitting it in 1 minute.
I mean, like 1 minute is hard, right? But I think just sort of like, where does the inflation come from? And like, asking that question, I think, is a great starting point, because they say greedy corporations. It's like, well, how are they being greedy? What do you think they're just charging more money? But then wouldn't the competition just charge less money if they can still make a profit and just eat their lunch? Like, what's going on, right? So I find that to be reasonably effective. But honestly, most of the time, the people that you're going to have the easiest time orange pilling are already kind of interested. And I see it like not that different than Christianity, right? The people that you convert are not the hardcore atheists, right? You're not converting Sam Harris by arguing with him. The people that like come up to you and ask you about it, well, those are the people that God's kind of put into your life for that reason, because they're already kind of seeking, and you're just sort of helping things along. And that's really all you can do is, they have their own curiosity, and you just help them along. Okay, here are some resources, here are some questions I can answer, or whatever. But, like, how do you like convert people, like force them to recognize the reality of what's going on or whatever? Most of the time that doesn't work. The thing is, most people really only learn through pain, and the pain of inflation is, it's something that causes them to actually start asking questions. The interesting, so I know multiple North Korean defectors, right? And the thing that it was endlessly fascinating to me is that for most of the 80s, you didn't have any defectors from North Korea. But then the famine hit once the Soviet Union fell, and they weren't getting any subsidies from neighboring communist countries. There was this giant famine, and it was for the want of a bowl of rice that most of those people ended up leaving. Right? It wasn't, okay, my natural rights are being violated. Right? Like it wasn't. I realized that, the communist ideology is evil. It's, I want a bowl of rice, right? Like that's what led most of them to escape. And I think we're sort of in the same situation today. Like most people are complaining about the fact that they can't afford anything. They can't afford a house. They can't afford food. They can't afford gasoline or whatever. Enough pain will get people to wake up. But like before that, like I would hope that they can intellectually understand stuff, and there are certainly some people that come along that way. But for the vast majority of people, it just requires pain.
So you're saying these these people would leave North Korea for a bowl of rice, driven by hunger, but then when they get the other side and they look back, then they would understand, like the system they came from, the system they're in now, how they function, and whoa, my eyes are open.
Yeah, that's generally how at least from the defector stories that I've read and talked to various defectors about. Yeah, they like the reason they left was because they were hungry, right? Like I'm just like so hungry right now. I'm about to die. I don't have any other choice. I'm gonna go across the river and see if there's something there, and that's how they escape. And like honestly, life in China isn't great for a North Korean either, and there are all sorts of dangers and so on. But they're like, okay, at least I can eat, right? Like they still like, okay, like a lot of like something like 70% of North Korean defectors end up being women, and the reason is because the brokers that get them across are tricking them into sexual slavery, right? Like this is something that like very few people talk about, but this is what ends up happening. But even still, they're like, at least I didn't die, right? Like they're put into sexual slavery and forced to basically be a wife of a Chinese farmer or something like that. But they at least survive, and that was for them like a significant thing. And later on, if they ever make it out of China into South Korea or something, then they finally say, okay, they learn a little bit more about like the actual human rights angle and natural rights angle, and what a communist society is like, and so on.
Yeah.
Sorry, so heavy.
No,
it's like we're reading George Orwell and talking to him in person here.
So just to let you know, there's a book that was published by a friend of mine, Yeonmi Park, and she's a North Korean defector, and she wrote her first book, In Order to Live, and it documents a lot of this stuff, right? Like I just wanted a bowl of rice, basically, and the sex trafficking in China that she was subject to and everything else. And then like her journey to Korea. But then she wrote a second book like a couple of years ago. And this is called While Time Remains. And what she's observing is that, well, she's now a US citizen, but what she's observing is that the West is becoming way more like North Korea. And that should scare everybody, right? I believe Jordan Peterson wrote the foreword for the book, and one of his things was like, you have to take these warnings seriously. Like this is a North Korean woman telling you that the U.S. is becoming more like North Korea, and I've heard similar things from people that were formerly in the communist bloc, from people from communist China and so on. They're like, yeah, this is exactly like, the whole like, tell us how you're racist is exactly what a struggle session is. And this is like a common thing in communist countries. You have to tell everybody else how you've been deficient, or how you've seen other people be deficient in something. Like,
yeah,
this is coming. This is here. It's and I feel bad for you guys in Canada, because it's like I feel like further along than here in the U.S.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, we agree, Jimmy. I mean, there's an election next year, so we'll see what happens. I hope that there is some cultural change. Economically, I think we're probably too far gone. But Brent, you got something on the tip of your tongue. Stick it out.
Yeah, I just have a couple, maybe to pivot a little bit, but a line from your book was, under Fiat morality, people are considered resources of the government, subject to the whims of the elite. And that comes from the Fiat Ruins Everything book. So I think it kind of dovetails with what we're talking about, but just go a little bit more into like a fiat morality and I guess fiat money. If somebody has access, and in our case, we're saying the government has access to print money at whatever whim they want to and give it to whoever they want to. How does that mean that people are their resources?
Yeah. Well, so like at a very basic level, the act of inflating the money supply, the monetary expansion, if you will, literally takes resources away from the people that have saved. So if I have, $1,000 in the bank account and, I have 1,000 over however many dollars there exists, right? And if that denominator doubles, then I have half as much, right, in value because everything else kind of goes up in price. That's how things are taken away. It's not explicit, right? You're not coming into my house and grabbing like money out of from under my bed or something. But it is taking away. It is theft in the sense that you're taking away value that I have accrued. So that's a significant part of the slavery we're under. But more importantly, the money that the government that collects that way by printing it into existence, they can use for all kinds of things. And generally, they subsidize certain things that they would like and tax things that they don't like. And pay for things in ways that they want it spent and so on. So,
because some people can see that as a good thing, right? They pick certain things. It's like, well, that's good. We have free healthcare. I'm glad they spent money on that. They spend money on education or roads.
No, not all their values are completely evil, but if you're at least thinking about the United States and stuff, well, where does most of that money go, right? Like, you look at like the conflict in Ukraine, for example, the quote unquote like $70 billion in aid. Where does that money go? If you just trace it, what's happening is the quote unquote $70 billion in aid to Ukraine comes right back to defense contractors in the United States for weapon systems and tanks and whatever, like equipment, guns and things like that. It's a subsidization for the richest people. Even when you're quote unquote giving away free healthcare, in the U.S. at least, where's that money going? Well, they're going to the healthcare companies, right? Like they're the ones that you're forced to buy the plans from and so on. And through that, they subsidize this rent-seeking class, right? Of people that are getting in the middle of this transaction between you and your doctor, really without adding any value. And it's like, many, many billions of dollars that they're able to extract from people because people, need health care. And, there's all kinds of stuff like that happens where the bureaucrats in charge get to decide where the money goes. And for that reason, people want to essentially getting good with the state. And at that point, it's okay, well, then here are the values that I am imparting, and you better align with them or else you're not going to get any of this money. And this could be bureaucratic positions or whatever. But, how many people got fired, right, for, not taking the vax or something like that? And it's no surprise that, like, if you're a bureaucrat or if you're like working for an educational institution, which is ultimately run by the state, your opinions are going to be very, very closely aligned with whatever the government says. They get to determine the morality because they're the ones that are able to not just steal your value, but bestow some of it back, right? But through that redistribution mechanism, means that you're going to try to do whatever you can to get the money that they're offering, and too many people take that bargain and give up their beliefs, morality, soul, really, in order to serve the state, and that's what they end up doing. And by using the money, it looks like it's a market-based system, right? If the government is paying you to do something, it feels like a market process, but it's not. It's them stealing money from other people to. It's the same thing as getting you to do it, right? Like it's like drafting you to do work X. It could be work X, could be fighting in a war or providing medical services or whatever. It looks like a market-driven process because they happen to pay you, but it's no different than slavery. If they drafted you to be a doctor for the free healthcare system and forced you to work every day, you would say this is tyranny. But if they do it through fiat money, where they steal money from everybody else and pay you, now it looks like a market process. I agree that the former is a lot more tyrannical, but the second is just as, there's still tyranny in the second one, right? This is the way in which we're enslaved, essentially.
Well,
it's just like an ongoing debasement of our civilization.
Well, and it's interesting. You bring that up about the sort of redistribution of wealth and so forth. Like, it's not all people think, well, I pay my taxes, so if I get some of that back, that's great. If I work in whatever system. But I think a lot of people realize that, the point of taxation now really is to regulate behavior, and that most of the money that is spent is actually not from taxes, because taxes cannot pay for everything on the government's agenda. It's just made up money. It's printed money that represents a huge portion of what you're talking about, Jimmy, that, whether it goes, whatever the government is funding, that's not even tax dollars. It's, you could say it's future tax dollars. They're pulling ahead revenue. Sorry, my internet's being silly again. But it's not even real money. So just contributing to that debasement we talked about. So one thing I wanted to talk about, we've had some folks up in our neck of the woods kind of look at M2 expansion in Canada anyways, and they calculated that to be around 7% per year since 2000 or so. And interestingly enough for us, that's about the rate of the increase in real estate values over that same time period. And, people are talking about, well, shelter's unaffordable because of, these investors and all these other things. When it's like, it's pretty, pretty obvious to me anyways, that really it's just, assets are being inflated because of monetary debasement. And, we both work in real estate, and like, we get it. It probably shouldn't be a system where people can make money, but that's where we are. But you've written about, I think you have a chapter about that, right? Real estate is illusory. So I'd be interested on your, some thoughts about real estate and the ethics of it and so forth.
Well, so let me say something about the 7%. If you calculate that in the United States, the M2 money supply since 1959 to 2024 that we're in right now, 59 it was $287 billion, roughly around there. Currently, it's around 23 trillion. If you do the CAGR on that, the compound annual growth rate ends up being about 7%. So it's kind of consistent, right? And not surprisingly, that's also the benchmark for any financial advisor. That's the hurdle that everyone is looking to beat. And unsurprisingly, real estate is that ends up being around 7%. Stocks also tend to be right around there as well. This is why they pay so close attention to whoever the Federal Reserve Chairman happens to be, because if they lower the interest rate, there's more money expanding, and if more money is expanding, it tends to go towards stores of value like stocks and real estate. So that's where that comes from. But if you think 7% is scary, that's nothing. The global M2, and this is something that I learned from Safety, is expanding at about 14% a year. So for every Canada, for every United States, there's some other poor sucker in some other country that's undergoing 21, right? Which is kind of crazy. But that's, at around 25%, that means like half your savings is debased every 3 years. That's just right? Like crazy amounts of debasement. But that's where we are. Now, with specific respect to real estate, what governments have done is placed an undue importance into real estate. So it's treated sort of unfairly in the market, basically. In the U.S., you have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that will insure mortgages that are quote unquote conforming. So if you have that, if you lend to, the profile that they want, then they will insure it. So every bank will make as many loans as possible because, first of all, it's money that comes from nothing, right? Like if you're getting a mortgage for $500,000, you have a $100,000 down payment. The $400,000 that the bank lends you did not come from savings. It's not anyone's savings. It is money printed out of nothing. So whenever they're giving out lots of mortgages, that means that the money supply is actually expanding quite fast. And unsurprisingly, when you favor mortgages by giving them lower interest rates, they're going to be way more mortgages made. That means that property prices go up. So they've been treated favorably in a lot of countries for a long time, and this is part of that like communist almost a sense that everyone needs to own a home or something like that. So governments treat it favorably, and therefore real estate has had this enormous premium. Now, real estate has this going for it. It's scarce, right? I think it was Mark Twain that said you should invest in land because they're not making more of it. And it's true. It's scarce in the sense that there's only a fixed supply of land, so there's at least some restrictions there. As a result, people use it as a store of value rather than dollars or whatever. And if you know anyone rich, they probably have a portfolio of stocks, maybe a little private equity here and there, and maybe they're angel investors or have some money in venture funds. But a significant part of their wealth is probably also in real estate for that reason, because it's scarce, and that premium is detrimental to everybody because the people that invest in real estate aren't necessarily using it, right? We have this phenomenon of a large number of apartments in Vancouver and New York City, some of the hottest real estate markets in the world, that are sitting empty. Why? Because the investor just wants to own it, right? And is holding it because of the price appreciation. And they can't be bothered to actually rent it out because it's too much risk, right? Like they might trash the apartment or something or whatever. So they just kind of leave it empty. What does that tell you? That means that the people that are not getting it, like the people that would actually use it, that they don't get access to it. And this has been the case for a while with real estate. The people that end up owning it are not the people that are using it for its utility. There's this significant store of value premium. It's gotten so bad that you have this phenomenon of ghost cities in China. These are entire cities full of apartments that sit empty. And the only reason people buy them is because they think real estate is scarce, which, in a demographic crisis that China is facing, this is going to not end well because there's going to be no market for these apartments at a certain point. So you have this large store of value premium that really needs to come down because, if you didn't have it, then it would go to the people that are using it for its utility and not for, its price appreciation. So, somebody that wants to have a large family buys a large house because they have a large family instead of, some guy that just wants, some price appreciation on it. So I think that's been distorted significantly in real estate that I expect Bitcoin to fix at least a little bit. But yeah, there's many other things, but that's my rant on real estate.
So your idea too is that fiat money perpetuates this, right? So as long as the central banks control the money supply, the government controls the money supply, people will still try to pursue other assets as a store of value, real estate being one. Probably
because it's
perfect.
Favored by the government.
Yeah. Okay. But if we ever pivot to a world where fiat money is no longer a reality, then real estate could have a big transition coming for it.
Yeah, and I expect the store of value premium to come down, not just in real estate, but also stocks. So, like, one of the things I point out in Fiat Ruins Everything is, back during the gold standard, the dividends were crazy, right? Like, Standard Oil most years gave out dividends of 10%.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah,
Dividends of 10%, right? There was one year where they gave out like 35%, something insane like that, which like would never happen in a fiat economy. There's too many finance bros that would arb that to death until it's zero. But that's what you had to do to get investment, is offer significant dividends like that. That is obviously no longer the case. Instead, you have price to earnings ratios that are significantly higher than during the gold standard for that reason, because there's like a lot of these assets don't even provide a dividends, right? Like, so Amazon has been in existence for like 35 years. They've never paid a dividend, like, ever. So, like, why are you holding it? Well, you're holding it for the price appreciation. It's not like the income that the asset gives you. And that ends up being sort of like this Keynesian beauty contest. And this is something that I call postmodern investing. It's not at all about the underlying fundamentals, because in any asset, if it's based on underlying fundamentals, it's about the income that it can generate, and some multiple of that is how you value it. Instead, it's become sort of like this Nietzschean will to power thing, and we saw this with like GameStop, right? With these guys that were just like sort of pumping it and saying, we can pump it as long as we have buyers, then there's nothing you can do. Turns out that Wall Street has been doing essentially the same thing for a very long time, where they could keep whatever stock they want up until you're insolvent, basically, and like do a short selling rally or something like that, or a short covering rally or something like that. So it's this very weird system that you end up with, where everything is sort of like unhinged from reality. The stock market, I think, is definitely one. I think real estate to a large degree is like that too, where prices are like, for homes, like based on like what you could rent it out for, like the ratios don't make any sense at all. And it's because of fiat money, because of the favorable treatment that it gets, and all of the new money that's coming into the market. Well, guess where it's going? It's going into a lot of this stuff, and it distorts the market in significant ways. Yeah,
and that's a problem, especially in Canada. Like, we're much smaller than the States, obviously, but just lack of innovation, right? If you have money, would you rather start a business that's going to be red taped to death and bureaucratized to death, or just go buy another house and rent it out? Like, that's the choice most Canadians make. So we have severe lack of innovation. Our GDP, like our productivity numbers show that, right? 2015, we kind of unhinged from the same trajectory as the US, and it's just been downward spiral ever since. And that's it's one of those effects.
That's why Jimmy doesn't live here. Lives in Texas on the new frontier.
So if we can, maybe we pivot a little bit.
Hey, if you move to Canada, you'll be a big innovator. You could move our country forward.
Oh, man.
If I did, I would move to the Texas of Canada.
Alberta. Yeah, even
Alberta.
Even the big cities are, like in Alberta, are just socialist havens. I mean, maybe that'll change, but it's something. Anyways, fiat ruins everything. So, yeah, we've talked about that a little bit, but I think there was a chapter you didn't write, right? About fiat. Mm-hmm. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I've written 2 books that are sort of like related. Thank God for Bitcoin, and fiat ruins everything. And if you combine the two, it would be fiat ruins churches. And that's a chapter I wanted to write, didn't really get to write it. I touched upon it a little bit in both books in different ways, like fiat ruins charity and how fiat corrupts churches. But I didn't really talk too much about how fiat actually ruins churches. And I did a lecture recently at Lipscomb University about exactly that, which is, I think, what you're referring to.
Yes, I mean, like,
So
them's fighting words,
it does
Jimmy.
ruin the church.
Fiat ruins churches. But come on. You got to back that up a little bit, man.
All right. So let's get into it then, because the main thing that I see is, and fiat's ruined a lot of things. So the first thing to sort of understand is that fiat has certain incentives, fiat money. First is this idea of debt-based building, right? You can build stuff right away by taking out debt and creating, right? That sounds like a good thing. Okay, why we can build things now instead of later. The problem is that if you're borrowing it and you don't pay it back, then you've just sort of like ruined stuff. And you see this all over China, all these buildings that they built that they're halfway built, they didn't have money to finish it, they're tearing them down, like all over the place. And you've seen this with like the world's tallest skyscraper multiple times, right? Where it sort of stayed in a half-finished state for a while before it got finished during like a bull market or something like that. But debt-based building is definitely a fiat value. Another one is this focus on money, this idea that money can solve everything, and that is something that a lot of rich people sort of have this mentality, right? Like, okay, who can I go pay to fix it, right? And it could be, well, you're a sinner. Who can I go to pay to fix it, right? That's a significant one. Another one is, focus on scale. And this naturally happens because of the debasement that we're all under. So, every company, every product, every service, like they have to deal with this at least 7% debasement in their currency. So what do you do if you're constantly getting debased? People don't, like to plan, and if your prices go up, then you've like screwed them up. So they're going to look for something else to go get. This is the phenomenon of sticky prices. So to keep the price the same, you could do lots of evil things like use cheaper ingredients, make it smaller and stuff, which we're all seeing.
That doesn't happen.
but the one thing that you can do that's sort of okay is scale up, right? Like you just make the production process, you just produce many, many, many more units, so you can amortize the cost over them, and that makes things cheaper. So a lot of companies end up doing this. This is like one of the few legitimate ways to sort of cut costs and keep up with it. So there's a tendency to get really, really large, because that's the only way you can sort of economize even a little bit under this regime of constant debasement. And then finally, there's there's a phenomenon I call outsourced virtue. And it's kind of related to the second one about like how money solves everything, or this mentality that money solves everything. It's this idea that, by voting for some policy that you consider virtuous, that you are virtuous yourself. And people do this a lot. This is, it's based on sort of like what group you identify as, and the virtue assigned to that group, you sort of like get by being associated with that group and so on. This is why we get virtue signaling, because people want association with those virtues.
How would you say that like fiat money actually creates that behavior or continues that behavior?
So the reason
I see it, but
so the reason is because the money printer becomes the prize, right? Like so if you can get into a position of power, then you can essentially spend the money the way that you want, all this stolen money. So every group is asking for something from from those places, and by and the government wants to seem virtuous. Oh, we're fixing this by giving this money to these people or whatever, and that's sort of the dynamic at play. So the thing that the government's constantly selling about, okay, we want to print more money so we can do these good things. Now, by voting for us, you can have credit for doing that, even though you had nothing to do with it other than like vote for it, right? Now we're going to give you credit for all of that virtue. This is what that is. But yeah, the consequences are you have a lot more people trying to identify with groups that are sort of like victimized. So there's this victimhood mentality where everyone wants to be a victim so they can get handouts from the government, and the government takes the inflationary money, gives it to them, and then gives you, the voter, the credit for like having done something good, right? This that phenomenon of outsourced virtue. So those are 4 different fiat sort of like values or fiat mentalities that come into play. And they and I would argue that all of them have penetrated the church. So most churches are into debt-based building, right? Historically used to have like cathedrals and stuff that took 200 years to build. And that was completely normal. And people were very patient about it. They didn't spend money they didn't have. Like who would lend to a church anyway? They did it that way. Nowadays, it's go into debt so you can build this large building. And this is the mentality that a lot of churches have gone into. Expand before the congregation's actually there. And they call it doing it in faith. Really, it's just doing it with hopium or something, right? Like this has been very damaging because, you're now a servant to the bank. I was, I think before the show, talking to you guys about some of that. But if you get into financial trouble, right, where you can't service the debt anymore, you have to find other sources of revenue. And one of the few assets that most churches have is real estate. So that's what they leverage. Whether it's selling off a part of their land, right, like whatever property that they might have. So if they get into trouble, that's what they might do. Or they rent it out, right? Like, okay, yeah, we'll host a preschool here during the week, or we'll make it available for weddings outside the church, or whatever, and this becomes a revenue source so that they can service the debt and so on. So, churches end up like, not that that's bad. If you're a property manager, I don't think you're sinning or anything. But, churches are churches. They're not property management companies. But that's what they end up becoming because of this debt-based building. The second one, like money can solve everything. This is I think this mentality has penetrated everyone in the church, right? Even the capital raising programs for building bigger buildings, it's all based on, okay, let's make sure, let's get pledges from everyone. Let's depend on the earning power of our congregation, rather than depending on God, right? Aren't we Christian? Aren't we supposed to depend on God, right? Like, I'm currently going to a church that started 2 years ago during the pandemic, and we have a building and we have no debt. Now, that was a miracle, and there were all sorts of crazy circumstances that came into it. But you have to leave room for God to work in that instead of depending entirely on money, which I think way too many churches do. And you can see it sort of like penetrate to the congregants as well, because you ask any young couple at a church, like, why aren't you having kids? Oh, well, we can't afford it. Well, what are you saying? That the money would take care of the kid? That the money would make things better? Or like that's the restriction? Aren't you supposed to depend on God? What happened to that, right? What happened to trusting in God to, do the like help you? And, like he's given you lots of other things besides money, right? Like your skills, your relationships and things like that. Why aren't you using those? Why do you have to have money? Why is it money that has to solve this problem? And even like elder boards, like it's almost always the people that tithe the most. It's okay. Well, these people are wise because they contribute lots of money, I guess, rather than okay. Well, the actual qualifications for elder are like your ability to teach and your consistent prayer life and having like a good family and stuff like that. That those are all secondary now to, okay, you've been contributing money for like, they think money solves everything, right?
Or even if you're a financial success, like your business is doing well,
Yeah. Because they've made essentially like money their God in some way. And of course, like that debt-based building and the primacy of money, right? Like thinking that money solves everything means that, significant amounts of money go into the building itself. And, we all give lip service to the churches, the people, right? The congregation. But if you've spent $20 million in a church building, I mean, that tells you all you want to know. Like, don't tell me what you believe. Show me your portfolio. Your portfolio is mostly a building. Well, that tells me everything I need to know about where you put your priorities, right? Like that ends up becoming a God that you're serving. The third one is, focus on scale. And we've seen this with so many churches. I'm sure in Canada you have mega churches as well. But this idea of scaling up as a way to reduce costs or to become more popular or something like that, it becomes completely impersonal and it feels like a business. And that's which is exactly what a church should not be, right? It should not be about running a business of, okay, let's make sure everything is running smoothly financially. It should be about relationships. It should be about your holiness. It should be about your relationship with God. Instead, it's all about, okay, let's make sure that we have enough services and we have enough staff to run these programs, and all, like it becomes complete. And all of these churches like scale up, and it becomes like this very impersonal business where you don't you're like a consumer, right? And a lot of that mega church going experience is very much like a religious country club, right? Where you're going there to, maybe you get a latte or something and, you sit, you sing a few songs, you shake hands with a few people that sit around you every week, and then you go home. Like there's nothing about following Christ in doing that. You're getting entertained for 40 minutes a week, right? Like that's all you're doing. And then finally, there's the outsourced virtue. And this happens in conjunction with the scale thing where, most of these churches are incentivized to keep the butt in the seat, right? Make sure you keep coming. So instead of giving you a challenging word, they make you feel good. And one of the ways in which they make you feel good is talking about all the ministries that the church is doing. You know what we did last Saturday? We went to this food bank and fed a bunch of people. And the idea there is that, okay, well, you guys made it all happen. It's your tithes and offerings that made it happen. This is outsourced virtue. They're asking for your money. There's no cross-carrying necessary. It is somebody else in the church did it. You're going to get the credit because you're part of this church.
Nobody's getting out of their
that is
comfort
not
zone.
Christianity. That has never been Christianity. It requires personal holiness. It requires you to carry the cross instead of somebody else doing it for you. But most churches have gone down this route where, okay, we'll just have this separate group that does it. Maybe they're the especially holy ones or whatever. But let's give credit to everybody, right? Let's you guys all did it. This is all you. And it makes you feel good, so you come back. But it's not really at all about what Christ meant it to be. And and all these mentalities have just like deeply penetrated the church to the point where like very few people recognize that there are even problems, right? It's like, oh yeah, I gotta keep going to church, blah blah blah, and and then a few years later, why don't I have any friends at church? Maybe I should check out this other place or whatever. There's like a deep dissatisfaction with a lot of churches, and people don't really know why. Well, these are the reasons. It's fiat money that has penetrated it. It's not a community that Christ meant it to be, and it's become this corrupted fiat thing.
Wow. I'm interested in your comments on how does Bitcoin actually fix this? Maybe that's another whole podcast, but the subtitle to your book is how our financial system is rigged and how Bitcoin actually fixes it. So in the context of churches, I don't know, like for us to say, okay, well, fiat money kind of perpetuates these different problems like debt-based building, outsourced virtue, all this stuff. But what could Bitcoin do? Because this is kind of maybe your angle, right? That not everyone sees Bitcoin as a solution.
Yeah. So here's the thing about Bitcoin. It's not debt-based building. So it's savings-based building. It's savings technology. If you're able to save, and a large part of the debt-based building is because if you save for like 7 years under the current monetary regime, right, in fiat money, what ends up happening is you lose half of the value, right? And what church wants to do that? If it's a leaky faucet, they're not going to keep it in there. But Bitcoin is a good bucket, right? And it's you can save in it, and you're not going to lose value. In fact, at least during the this process of Bitcoinization, it's going to increase in value, probably significantly more than if you keep it for 5 years or more. It's going to do very, very well. So you have the savings-based technology, and that means that you can have savings-based building instead of taking out debt. Well, now, as a congregation, you are forced to be a lot more patient, right? We want to grow a building. Okay, we're going to start saving now, right? And it might take us 5-10 years to get there, but we're going to do it faithfully, and we're going to let God work, right? If that's the route you want to go. But the other route is that money doesn't solve everything. Sometimes God gives you stuff because he wants to bless you, right? Because he sees the things that you're doing and wants to give you a building. And that's what happened to our church. He gave us a building, right? We were faithful in meeting over COVID, and God seemed to like that, and we got a building for free through a series of miracles. And this is where you give God room to work. Instead of seeing money as the solution to everything, now, it's a tool, it's serving us. But you know what? The main player here is God. And we need to be obedient to him and pray to him. It's a lot more based on God can do these instead of the money can do these. Because some congregations don't have any money. And if you know any like black churches in the inner city, they have no money, like just nothing. Like they get so little money every week. It's like kind of a miracle that they can even meet. But I mean, like are those any less churches just because they happen to be poor? I don't think so. You give room for God to work, and I think he can if you're faithful in obedience. The third one, like this focus on scale, I don't think churches get to the scale under a Bitcoin standard. You don't need to expand. And like there are sort of like hard limits on a lot of this stuff. The reason why a lot of the way in which a lot of mega churches expand is through debt-based building, but you don't have that available. Well, like people just start another church, and there's all kinds of evidence that past like Dunbar's number, it's hard to know everybody, and it becomes like completely impersonal. I think churches stay at like the 150 people level, right? Or like at least have like something equivalent to parishes or something like that, where it is that number, because that's like at the level where you're like a real community. And that's amazing, because that's how churches are supposed to be. And finally, instead of outsource virtue, you don't have the scale where you can have like the 5 cross carriers and everybody else sort of like riding on them. You have people that are challenged to do actually what Christ said, right? And being like a light in the neighborhood instead of like being in a holy huddle. And I think you get to that because you don't have like all of this debt available. And pastors can, if they're not dependent on the income of the congregants, which a lot of pastors currently are, well, then they can actually say stuff from the pulpit that's actually more challenging, and that work on people's holiness instead of making you feel good. It's, like, we need to be doing these things, and we should be ashamed of ourselves for doing these things. Now, a lot of people might leave, but if that's what God is putting on the heart of the actual preacher, then that's the word that needs to be said. And those people that left, like, you need to release them out into the world, whatever. Like, you get real Christianity, I think, as a result of not having fiat money in there.
Yeah, maybe the truth can be revealed in a different way when you're on Bitcoin. So practically, though, how would that work? Like, would you expect kind of most people, if not everybody, to own Bitcoin? Or you're just talking like hypothetically, as we have more and more people have Bitcoin in society, we eventually kind of abandon fiat. And at some point, the church under a Bitcoin standard might change? Or is it like, churches can kind of, if we adopt Bitcoin now, like this, we can kind of force this change earlier before the rest of society? Or I'm just thinking, practically speaking, what does that look like? You pass around the Bitcoin bag and everyone taps their phone, or?
Well, so the beautiful thing about
these
Bitcoin,
concepts in theory, right? So
yeah. The beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that you don't need everyone to convert at once, right? And this is the problem with the gold standard, and why I was so frustrated, I think, with all of the gold bugs is they're like, we need to get a political action committee together, and then we can go back on the gold standard and make sure our fiat currency is backed by gold or whatever. But that doesn't work because there's no momentum for it, and it's politically completely, unrealistic. But with Bitcoin, you can just do it on your own. I'm on a Bitcoin standard. There are lots of other people on a Bitcoin standard, and I don't see why churches couldn't be the same way. There's a guy on Twitter, Pastor Corin, I believe he's Canadian. He has a church where I think they're trying that, right? Where they're trying to get on the Bitcoin standard as a church and trying to follow a lot of these things. And, I see more of that popping up as, Christians start to realize how evil fiat money is and how you don't want to be supporting this system or being sort of exposed to the theft by the central bank for your property. I think one church, like one individual at a time, converts to Bitcoin and like goes on the Bitcoin standard. I think one church at a time will do that. Now, is it realistic for your particular church to do it at this moment when the pastor doesn't even know about it, or might even think it's like the mark of the beast or something? Probably not. But, this is where, you need Bitcoiners to kind of speak up and say, you know what, like what we're doing here is evil, and we need to think about ways in which we can honor God better. And, these mentalities have penetrated our church. We need to change some of it.
Yeah. Well, wow. I think these are all things, everything you kind of touched on. I've been making notes. I'm not like playing Candy Crush over here. Even if it's not, as you said, practical to sort of switch over to a full Bitcoin standard, these are all things we can do now if we realize the problem, right? If we realize what's happening, and how fiat influences our thinking in our churches. And I mean, this hits for me because I'm on our council or elder board. We have a growing church. Mm-hmm. We're looking for a building, right? We're meeting somewhere and we're making it work, but we're looking for a building. And, how do we, we're also praying for a miracle. The church that we kind of were planted from had a situation where, they didn't get a church for free, but like pretty close. And it just, God was working there. It worked out very well. So we're hoping, praying for a similar thing. But all this stuff, these attitudes can change and can, like we could start working on this now, right? So we had Pastor Cohen on a while ago, actually. That was a good one. But we we're talking about, unrelated, but sort of related, right? The fragility of young people these days in general. And, I went on a bit of a rant, but, our quote unquote producer, Gideon was saying, okay, like, yeah, fine. You're complaining about young people these days. But like, what do they do? Right. And one of the conclusions I think we came to is, have kids. You're a young couple, you get married, have kids. And this is to your point about, well, I couldn't possibly, I hear that all the time. I can't have children because, we're waiting till we can afford them. And like, what exactly are you, what kind of life are you hoping for
Trusting
your kids?
in,
Yeah. Where are you putting your trust? And it's like, one of the best things you can do is have children. It's good for you, but it's also like a command from God, right? Go forth and multiply, have children. And, when we, again, have this sort of fiat thinking where money dominates everything, and well, I can't have children until I've got, more bedrooms in my house, and I have, I'm ready to start a savings plan for them, and they have, then they have to do, after school programs, and I can only afford to send 2 of my kids to hockey. It's hockey in Canada. Right.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Not football. Right. All these things, right. It's like, no, just have children, and, have lots of children. That would solve our immigration problem too. But that's another thing. But like, this is something we can do now. We don't have to wait till we have a Bitcoin standard to do it. But once you are sort of out of the fiat mindset, and if you're in a Bitcoin mindset, then that becomes a lot easier to explain and to understand. Yeah, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here.
One of the quotes from your book is, "Civilization cannot progress without humans, and all humans must pass through childhood. Why don't we value the growth of the human population?" So I think Jimmy's on board there.
Yeah, I'm definitely on board there. Just one thing that I put in my newsletter this morning that I want to point you to, because you mentioned sort of like the fragility of Zoomers and stuff like that. I have a little more sympathy after reading that article. Essentially, the article was arguing, well, here's what you need for manhood, right? Like, you need property, you need, you obviously want to procreate. I can't remember the third one, but all of these things require money. And the fact of the matter is we've been getting poorer.
Yeah.
And the poorer you are, the less sort of manhood you are capable of, because you don't have any of the resources to sort of like come into your full masculinity, if you will. So in a sense, the money has even corrupted that, right? The fiat money has made all these younger people into girly men, right? Like, and it's because they don't have any money. They have no wealth. They have no really access to it. And what's encouraging about Bitcoin is that it gives you some of that back, this ability to save, and you can have wealth. And, not everyone's going to choose to, add value to society and continue to try to make things better. But enough of them are that you will have more leaders and people that are able to, be, real men as a result. And I think that's one of the underrated things, is that fiat really does ruin everything, including, the mentalities of a lot of the people that are coming onto the market today. They're just like, they just see so little hope because they're so poor. It's been spent away from them by, older generations that stole from them and took their money, basically. Yeah, I see Bitcoin as hope for a lot of these people. Yeah.
What should they actually do, though? And we've been struggling with this on the show because we're in real estate, and it's out of reach for a lot of people. But like, would you have any sort of practical advice for especially young people?
Yeah, the practical advice would be, go provide value, right? And do it well. And I don't know what that looks like for you, because I don't know you specifically, because I'm speaking a little more generally. But whatever skills and talents that you might have, put it to use towards providing value, because the temptation will always be to become a rent seeker, to just collect the paycheck, working for some bureaucracy, and pretend that you're doing something good when in reality you're not. And that is maybe okay for your pocketbook, but it's going to destroy your soul. It's going to make you depressed. Your soul's going to know that you're not really providing value and that you're a leech on society and so on. Instead, go provide value. And if you don't have any skills that provide value, go learn something. There are plenty of trades that provide tremendous amounts of value, and there's a lack of tradesmen in almost every industry, where in almost every trade. You can go do that like right now, right? If you go learn how to be an electrician or a welder or, HVAC or plumbing or something like that, those all provide value. Now, they're not necessarily the highest status things right now, but under a Bitcoin standard, I bet you they will be, because they're clearly providing value, and those people are going to be richer because the value that they provide to the market is significantly higher than a DEI hire at a university or whatever. DEI, by the way, stands for didn't earn it.
I just saw that.
So that's very important, to actually provide value. Go earn it, right? Go earn the money, and then save in Bitcoin, right? Like, don't have a leaky bucket, and live. Don't live beyond your means. In fact, save, right? The Bitcoin gives you huge motivation to save because it's going up, right? It's scarce, and there's a higher demand and so on. So put your savings into Bitcoin and keep providing value. And at some point, whatever dreams you have, right? It could be changing an industry in a particular way, or it could be starting some company or doing whatever. Go pursue it once your savings is high enough. And may be whatever it is. And in the meantime, go get married, have lots of children, do the things that God wants you to do, and pursue those things with gusto. But have some humility. It's okay to go into the trades or something. It's okay to not have all of the esteem of men or whatever. Go do what's actually value providing, and those things will end up blessing you.
Yeah, that's great
advice. I think it's that's the Christian ideal, right? Really, you start whatever you do, you give first. You talked about that earlier, right? The navel gazing, the people being very introspective and self-fulfilled. No, you give first, and through giving, you will find your fulfillment, not through striving for yourself.
Yeah.
So,
and then reap, instead of getting into debt and then being enslaved the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Brent?
Ooh. Yeah, we solved it.
We fixed things. Great.
Provide value, save in Bitcoin. It's interesting that you said save in Bitcoin and not just invest in it, because I think that's a key thing that we can't really do right now is save. But for a lot of young people, they're trying to save up for a house, save up for something, and having that word come back and actually means something when you're saving in Bitcoin. That's pretty cool.
It's also the word that we use for salvation, and it's not a coincidence, right? Jesus saves us. All of the salvation words, by the way, are monetary terms, right? Redemption, debt, forgiveness. There's a reason why Christ used all of those words to describe salvation, because this is the trap that most people are in. He's taking a practical reality of the human condition, which is being in debt monetarily, to describe what's actually happening in the spiritual realm. The monetary thing is real, and it's something that a lot of people are trapped in. Savings.
Yeah.
That's how you get out of it.
So just quickly, I wanted to touch on, sorry, Brent. You got the fireworks going. Just quickly, I wanted to touch on something. And so we're talking a lot about, how kind of converting people in the church to Bitcoin. So another thing that I'm kind of interested in is converting Bitcoiners to Christianity, because I think there's many more Bitcoiners than there are Christians, I think. Or no, maybe not in sheer numbers.
No, the way more Christians than Bitcoiners.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Crazy.
There's nominal.
No, what I mean, there's
maybe.
more. Yeah, I know. There's more of a field for one than for the other, right? And I think one is more important. So I don't know. I haven't really fleshed that out, other than if I'm talking to Bitcoiners, I try and draw the parallels. Like, we're looking for truth, and there's truth, and we're looking for redemption because we know there's a problem. And because you talked about, you could try to convert an atheist, you're going to have a hard time probably, right? Look for the people that God is bringing to you and is working through already. And I feel like, that's Bitcoiners, because they understand that there is objective truth, because we don't have it through fiat money, and that there is redemption. Now, Bitcoin doesn't provide eternal salvation, but it's symbolic of the redemption that we're seeking from our sin, from a broken system.
Well, the word redemption comes from redeeming property, right? It's in debt somewhere, and then you pay money to get it back. That's where it comes from. So when you're talking about redemption of money, well, the money has been sort of like captured by somebody, and we can redeem money by or bring it back to its original intent of being our servant. So. But as far as like Bitcoiners, I found that a lot of them are very open to Christianity, and the process goes one of two ways. So one path that I've seen a lot is, they get into Bitcoin, they realize they've been lied about money all their lives, and then they start looking at other aspects of their life. So a common one is like food, for example. What should I be eating, right? Like, have I been lied to about, sugar and carbohydrates and seed oils and all this other stuff? And then they usually end somewhere where they're like, okay, I have a much healthier diet, maybe exercise, jobs, relationships, stuff like that. But a significant one is, okay, what about like all of this religion stuff? Have I been lied to about all of that? And then they start exploring things a little bit, and very quickly they come towards the big T truth, right? Like they've had a little taste of the little T truth, and it tastes so good. It makes a difference. They're seeing results. So, and they find their way to the big T truth, which is Christ. That's one way. Second way is a lot more practical. You're a Bitcoiner, you get married, you have some kids. Okay, I want to impart my values to my kids. How do I do that? And then they quickly realize, if I send them to school, it's not going to happen, right? Like, where's an institution that I can send my kids to, at least to have some of these values that I want them to have? And they very quickly converge on, okay, well, church, Sunday school. Yeah, that's about the closest thing that they find. It's how do I impart my morals to them? And then they get into it that way, from sort of a very practical standpoint. But yeah, I've seen both, and both not one's not better than the other or anything, but it does happen quite a bit. I don't think it's like something that you necessarily force, but enough people sort of like ask the same questions where, I've gone to a lot of conferences. Almost every one, somebody comes up to me and says, you know what, I'm a Bitcoiner. I read Thank God for Bitcoin. I started going to church again. And it's like, oh, well, great. Wow. I'm glad. And that's where I want to see them. But it's not any of my doing, right? It's just they were all sort of like ready for that, and it's God working in them. So I see a lot of that in Bitcoin. I think a lot of people, especially in the evangelical Christian leaders, quote unquote, like they're pretty dismissive of stuff like that. But I've seen it, and it's practical, and it happens. And I'm not too thrilled with many evangelical Christian leaders anyway, just because they tend to compromise with the world rather than do the things that Christ tells them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of long-term thinking that seems to be incentivized there. Like you talk about marriage and kids, and like just practically speaking, if they go on a Bitcoin standard, they start thinking, you know what? Like if my money lasts for a long time, then what about my soul? Well, that actually lasts forever. So what am I doing with that?
There you go.
Maybe I should check that out.
Well, I guess we'll look forward to your next book, Jimmy, from the little truth to the big truth, or something like that. We'll help you with the title.
Or truth, arrow, truth.
Yeah,
little T, big T, something like that.
Well, that's awesome, Jimmy. I think we're at the end of our time here. I don't know. How can people get a hold of you?
That was almost 2 hours,
Yeah,
guys.
I know.
That's a long podcast.
worth every second, worth every penny. There's no pennies involved. But if people want to, I don't know, like, can they get a hold of you? Should they just read your books? What do you got? What do you got for people, Jimmy?
You can follow me on Twitter at Jimmy Song. I have a newsletter, jimmysong.substack.com. I mentioned it earlier. Everything else you can sort of connect through that. I post random stuff on like Nostr, LinkedIn, Gab, and Substack and YouTube. So, I try to make it available on Twitter for the most part, at least. But it's that's where I am.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today. We got a lot out. We hope our listeners do as well. Brent, any final words?
No, thank you definitely for coming on, and hopefully come on after your next book.
We shall see. We shall see.
Well, right. To our listeners, thanks for being on this journey with us, folks. And until next time,
steward your wealth wisely. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.